Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I'm so pleased you've joined me for today's show. Today, we are exploring the location-specific tenancy guidelines for the state of Hawaii. And in all of my location-specific episodes, I've included hyperlinks to all of the locations. But for today, I have the Hawaii Residential Landlord-Tenant Code, Hawaii Landlord-Tenant Code. Each of my location-specific podcasts is set up in the exact same way, answering the four questions. What are the basics of the tenancy laws in this area? What are some of the nuances that I've noticed in this area? Some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant in the state of Hawaii, and then where to get help in your local area. I must tell you that there are more more guiding documents, more information than what I'm giving you here. This may not be everything. This is just to get you started and give you some guidance. And there may be some other things in your local state or province or county or city that things like registering your rental, or maybe you need to be licensed as a landlord. You won't know unless you dig more than what I am going to tell you here. So this episode is not all inclusive. You must research further in to get your specific area details and the nuances for your local area. But today's episode, again, will get you started. I do want to give a plug today to our sponsor, Aloha Capital Investments, LLC. If you want to know more about real estate investing, especially with Michael and I, check out alohajv.com, alohajulietVictor.com. That's Aloha Capital Investments, LLC. So let's get started. Let me screen share, and we'll get going with the Hawaii Residential Landlord-Tenant Code. Share screen share, and we are sharing that one. Okay, if you are watching on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, you're going to see the screen share as I go through this so that you'll know this little handbook is actually really helpful. It's 36 pages and it goes really quick. So we're just going to go through some of this as we'll just go through the basics of this. I'm not going to go through every single bit. But you'll know there's quite a bit in here. So residential rental application screening fee and rentals. So there is a couple different things. You're going to see application screening fee is very, very hot topic in all of the locations that I have found. So you've got to make sure that your application fee is only to cover your actual costs on actually screening the tenant, which can include personal reference checks, tenant reports, criminal background checks, credit reports. Typically, I try to work with the tenant, and so that they don't necessarily have to pay me. If they've got a way that they've already got the credit reports, then they can give it to me for free. But there is an application screening fee, but can only be for actual costs. And then your rental agreements, written agreements, oral agreements, in any landlording case, make sure it's written down. I know there's a lot of people who just do stuff on handshakes and by word of mouth. Okay, but when things go sideways, it's can be tough. You also want to make sure everybody knows who's supposed to be doing what. Who's paying for what utilities? Is the tenant required to cut the lawn or trim the hedges? Who provides the tools for landscaping or grass mowing, things like that. And then contact information for both the landlord and the tenant, as well as the amount of rent, any exchange of services, which I don't necessarily agree with. You don't necessarily want to do this, yard work for reduced rent, things like that. You want to make sure you're really clear on who's doing what, term of the rental, whether it's weekly, monthly, or a fixed lease. And if you are going to allow a sublet in some way, that's got to be in writing as well. And then what's the amount of the rent? What is the rent? Is it you're paying on the first of each month or weekly basis, things like that? You want to make sure. It also talks about proper notice of increasing rents. You want to make sure that you are giving the correct amount of notice for if a tenant is departing, or if you're going to increase the rent. You've got to make sure that you are really being mindful about this. So I also want to make sure that this is one of the nuances here of Hawaii that people don't realize. They say Hawaii is very tenant friendly. That is true, except this one clause. If you're in a month-to-month lease situation in Hawaii, you can give 45 days notice to increase rent to quote unquote market rate. Wow. So you can give proper notice, 45 days. That is what it is in the state of Hawaii, which that I have seen people leave the island because they cannot afford the new rent, which is really sad. But please be mindful of that in Hawaii, that if you're in a month-to-month situation, you give 45 days written notice to your tenant of a rent increase. That's what it is. Late fees. You can have a late fee, shall not exceed 8% of the rent due. It's very specific in here, and there's a cap on the rent late fee calculation. And inventory. This is condition inspection at the beginning and the end. For those of you who listen to the British Columbia podcast, I actually take the condition inspection checklist from BC and I use it in Hawaii because it's so good. So this is what I do, but I've seen other ones that are just as good as well. Advantages and disadvantages of the different types of rental agreements, periodic, meaning month to month, or if there's a fixed term agreement, there is advantages and disadvantages, and then legal requirements. And so this is sort of the legalese part of it. Everybody's got to act in good faith. Everybody's got to be authorized to manage, be a part of the lease. And here we talk about medical cannabis. If you're a card carrying medical cannabis user, you're allowed to smoke. Security deposits. This talks all about security deposits, what it is, how you're supposed to have it, what it's for, meaning key fobs, parking cards, garage door openers, mailbox keys. You're not supposed to charge. You can't charge for normal wear and tear. Normal wear and tear is not defined in the state of Hawaii, by the way. And I have asked at multiple events, and it always catches people off guard of how do you define normal wear and tear. We're going to talk about that as we go through more location specific episodes. This is also about security deposits are also to compensate for damages caused by any pet or animal allowed to reside in the premises, and also to cover any unpaid utility charges. Yeah. Let's see. So it talks about the amount of the deposit. The amount is basically 1 month's rent. And you're not supposed to use the security deposit as last month's rent unless everybody agrees. So typically we do not do this because rent, yeah, it's all paid in money, but rent and a deposit are not the same thing. It's all money, but it's not the same thing. Okay, so let's talk about repairs when the dwelling is sold. Yeah. So if a home is sold with a tenant in it, it transfers. If it's a fixed lease, it transfers to the new owner. If it's a month-to-month lease, there is a way you have to give proper notice and the tenant can depart. Security deposit disputes, anything involving a security deposit dispute goes to small claims. It's not a tenancy issue. It's actually like a private property issue. And so you go to small claims, and that's typical. That's very typical in many locations. Is a security deposit dispute is not a tenancy dispute. Okay, repairs. So you've got emergency repairs, habitable living conditions, including repairs to major appliances, electrical, plumbing, sewer. Landlord must take necessary steps to start the repairs within 3 business days from the time the landlord is notified of the condition, either orally or in writing. And unless the repairs were because of the misuse of the tenant. So this is really interesting because if the landlord becomes a deadbeat landlord, if the landlord is not actually making the repairs, then the tenant can take action, which is, again, very normal in tenancy laws, that the tenant can actually take action, especially when it has to do with something habitable, a habitation item that, affects their direct ability to stay there. And so you've got health and safety items, other repairs. And then the tenant can deduct the cost of the repairs out of the rent. But you've got to make sure that you've got other repairs. You got to make sure you do all this in writing, because if you do this wrong, it can be really tough. I'm on page 8. of the landlord-tenant code, and it says the schedule of deadlines for repairs. From the date of the notification, the landlord must start an emergency repair within 3 days. Excuse me. Repairs for non-compliance with either state, county law, code, or ordinance within 7 days, and general repairs within 12 days. Actually, it says emergency repairs 3 business days. That's interesting. 3 business days. Repairs for non-compliance within 7 calendar days. So it doesn't matter if that's over a weekend. And then general repairs within 12 business days. Okay, so it says prohibited practices, talking about retention of the security deposit, which has to be returned within 14 days, or you've got to have an itemized list of deductions. You cannot lock out your tenants, which is normal. Retaliatory evictions or rent increases if the tenant has complained to Department of Health, Office of Consumer Protection, or other agency concerning the condition of the unit that violate health laws, or if the tenant has requested repair in good faith and requested something, and the landlord has not done something, if the landlord then tries to evict them or tries to raise their rent, it's considered retaliatory. And so the landlord cannot do that. But there are a couple different ways in here of what the landlord can do, the landlord should do, the landlord must do. But again, it also goes with the tenant, right? The landlord may increase the rent where a substantial increase in taxes or operating costs not complying with the tenant's complaint. But it has a time in here, 4 months. So you can't do anything retaliatory within 4 months. The landlord has completed a capital improvement of the dwelling. This is the landlord may increase the rent where the landlord has done something substantial. And there's a couple other details in here. Termination of the tenancy month to month, and it gives you how to do a proper notice of the termination of the tenancy. And this is if the landlord is going to give notice to the tenant, because it is an abrupt ending of a fixed lease. A fixed lease, say it's 1 year, 1 year to 1 year, and there's no renewal at the end of 1 year plus 1 day. It has not been renewed. The tenant must depart. So you've got to make sure you're giving proper notice of either a renewal or let's say the owner wants to move in, or you're going to demolish the units, things like that. Same thing if a tenant is going to depart, then the tenant must give proper notice to the landlord as well. Otherwise, what happens is something called a holdover. If the tenant stays, it's called a holdover, and the tenant is actually staying there. But unfortunately, you can't stay. It says as a holdover, the tenant may be liable to the landlord for a sum which is not more than twice the monthly rent under the previous agreement. So you've got to be careful, because as a tenant, you don't necessarily want to have a holdover situation. And as a landlord, if the tenant won't leave, a holdover situation isn't necessarily a great thing either. As we progress through some of these location-specific podcasts, there is a lot about ending tenancies due to violence. And in this case, I'm on page 17 of, page 13 of the Hawaii Landlord-Tenant Code. This is talking about domestic violence, and this is domestic violence where the tenancy must be ended quickly, and notice to the landlord. And basically, there's been an event there that is police documented, and that's really key, is that there is a police report with this. And there's actual wording in here about what happens if the perpetrator resides with the victim. I mean, there's a lot of details in here. It doesn't end for that. For other locations, this is the only thing that is stated in Hawaii, domestic violence, but in other locations, there's also talking about human trafficking. There's talking about sexual assault. There's all kinds of other different things, and those are called protected tenants. So I want to make sure that as either someone who either has a rental in Hawaii or is thinking of having a rental in Hawaii, there are certain situations that are regarding violence and police activity that you are obligated, that you must end the tenancy to support your tenant, and this is one of them. Also in the Hawaii Landlord-Tenant code. It says active duty service members. This is military. And you're going to see there's quite a bit of wording about how service members and giving notice. Let's say somebody gets orders and you've signed a fixed lease, but the person is in the military and they've got orders to ship out, 30, 60, 90 days, whatever it is. So you've got to make sure that you are aware that when you're renting to a service member that they can get out of their lease. They also have to abide by the rules, but it talks a little bit about how this all works. There's also something really interesting in here that I've not seen in any of the other locations. And that is if a service member dies during active duty, what happens during when that happens is, so it's not just the death of a tenant, it's the death of a tenant that happens to be a service member. Very interesting that this is actually included in there. I guess it shouldn't surprise me because Hawaii is so rich in military members, especially the island of Oahu that has every kind of base you can think of. Over on Maui, there are some military members there, but it's not anywhere near what it is on Oahu. So this is very different. I've not seen this before. Want to make sure that I draw that to your attention as we go through. Okay, conditions a tenant may expect from a landlord. So there's a whole bunch of different things that basically rattles off a bunch of stuff about keeping things habitable. That's what this is a warranty of habitability. They don't actually specifically name it, but that's what it is. And then rental agreement, they're talking about the written agreement, rents for receipt for rents if they're going to pay in cash, and absentee landlord agent. This is another thing that people that rent in Hawaii, that are landlords in Hawaii, do not understand. And I have to always let people know. So I'm at the top of page 16. This is item D, and it says absentee landlord's agent. An absentee landlord shall designate an agent to act on the landlord's behalf, and that agent must reside on the same island as the rental unit. So if you're someone from the mainland who owns a Hawaii rental and you're trying to manage that from afar, you're supposed to have an agent located on the same island. I just want to draw that to your attention, because if that tenant has a problem and there's no one on island to help them and they're trying to get a hold of you and you're in a different time zone, it is difficult to manage a rental from afar. And I would know that because I've been doing all kinds of things like that for years and years and years. So there is a bunch of other legalese stuff in here. Tenant's right to demand disclosure, remedy non-disclosure, GET, general excise tax number. Okay. Let's see. Oh, this is access. You have to give at least 2 days notice to access the unit. Abandoned possessions. Here we go. Let's talk about this. This is one of the things we're going to talk about. So this is the requirement. A landlord may dispose of a tenant's abandoned possessions in several ways. And there is you've got to try to contact the tenant. You've got to mail a notice or you've got to post notice of your intent to either sell, donate, or provide the tenant's possessions. And it's a 15-day notification period to basically alert them and say, hey, we're going to sell your stuff. And in addition to the 15-day notification before selling the possessions, the landlord must advertise the sale in a daily paper of general circulation for at least 3 consecutive days. Interesting, because I'm not sure how that's working now because Maui doesn't have a daily paper anymore. So I don't know if you have to put it out or what. But if you're in this situation, contact a bailiff. There are lots of bailiffs all over the state. And I guarantee you they will know how to do this. And they will probably, for a fee, will probably take care of it for you. So keep in mind all of that. Also, the proceeds from the sale of possession shall, after deduction of rent and costs, including the cost of advertising, you've got to hold those funds in trust for the tenant for 30 days in the event the tenant comes up and says, hey, I want my stuff, I want my money of my stuff that you sold. So they can claim that. But if they don't do that within 30 days after selling it, then they can forfeit to the landlord. Okay, let's talk about the death of a tenant. The death of a tenant. I know this is something that people are talking more and more about because this is happening as our population is aging. So there is a deceased tenant's representative, and this is something that I'm seeing more and more, that in a tenancy application or in the lease process, you should have your tenant in some way a representative who is authorized to collect or dispose of tenant's personal property if a tenant dies during tenancy. In the event there's no representative, then the landlord must send notice to the estate. Unfortunately, there's a lot of places where people die in units and there is no estate. There's no way for anybody to get a hold of anybody. So it ends up, the landlord has to either go back to the tenancy branch of that location or legal aid and say, this has happened, what do I do? Sometimes it just goes to probate, which again, this is hard stuff. Written notice to the deceased tenant's representative. Basically, you've got to deliver notice of the tenant's death to whoever the representative is, if there is one, which hopefully there is one. And it says specifically on what you're supposed to do to tell them and how this is supposed to work. And then they're supposed to have dwelling access to the representative. Now, again, we're talking about the state of Hawaii. If the tenant dies and the representative is not in Hawaii, then that representative either has to hire someone or get on a plane and come over themselves. This is difficult. This is really difficult. So it talks a lot about items. And again, it depends on how you look at it. This isn't necessarily abandoned items because the person died. So it's a little bit of a gray area here. But there is some abandoned items in here as you go through it. Okay, let's keep going. Security deposit, 14 days of termination of tenancy or 14 days after the representative has removed the tenant's personal property. You've got to account for it, and then you've got to return security deposit. Then we get into tenant obligations. I'm on page 19. Tenant obligations is tenant maintenance. You've got to behave, comply with the rules. You need to pay your rent on time. And tenant's absence without notice. Oh, this is interesting. I've seen this more and more because I'm starting to study a lot more tenancy law stuff. So this one in Hawaii, it says if a tenant is absent from a dwelling for a continuous period of 20 days or more without written notice to the landlord, the tenant shall be deemed to have wrongfully quit the dwelling. So you need to be careful. If you're going to be gone as tenants, or if you know your tenants are going to be gone, make sure they're communicating with you that they're going to be gone so that you don't think the whole place is abandoned, because 20 days, that is less than a rental period. That just seems pretty quick to me, but maybe that's what it is. So tenant's obligation, the tenant must allow proper access if the landlord is given proper notice, and inform the landlord of repair needs. And there's other things as well. So landlord remedies. Now we get into different remedies of if people don't pay rent, court action, tenant negligence, like I said, absence, misuse, abandonment. Tenant quits before occupancy, meaning they have changed their mind before they actually move in. Yeah. So it says how to do this. And then they have all these sample letters. This is really interesting. So unlike some of the other locations that have pre-made forms that you literally just go into the PDF and you just type in what it is, and then you can either print it or you can save it. Typically you have to print it so that you can sign it. But this is not a pre-made form. It's basically a screenshot of what a letter would look like. So it has name of landlord, date, name of tenant, address of tenant, and then dear Mr. or Mrs. Tenant, you're hereby notified you failed to perform the according of following to the rule, and it'll say specify the rule that is breached. Be informed that if you continue violating or again violate this rule after it's put in the date, not less than 10 days from this date of notice, the landlord may terminate the rental agreement and sue for possession of your dwelling. Basically, it's the warning letter. It's a warning letter that's written for you, like a template, but it's not pre-made for you. But that's actually quite helpful that that's there. And then tenant remedies. In the event you can't gain possession, meaning if the landlord fails to have the unit ready for occupancy, meaning they thought they were going to have it ready and they don't, so that what do you do during the first week of occupancy? Termination at any time, unlawful removal or exclusion. There's a bunch. Yeah, again, we talk about retaliatory evictions or rent increases prohibited. Landlord's entry without permission, especially when if there is not an emergency going on, then they can't come in. And unreasonable entry, fire or casualty. Yeah, so there's a sample letter here. So this one says, this is a demand for request for repairing the dwelling. This is a tenant requesting. So it's another sample letter. And dear Mr. or Mrs. Landlord, I live at whatever the tenant's address is. I'm requesting the following problems be fixed as soon as possible. And then you list the problems. And again, this is written. If you cannot start the repairs within 12 business days, I'm going to start with the repairs and deduct the cost from my next month's rent and send you the receipts from the amount I spent. Please call or write me at, and then the tenant's phone number or the address. As soon as possible, let me know when these conditions will be repaired, especially if the landlord has to enter the unit to deal with some of this stuff. That's important that they communicate. So that's important. You've got it written in here. Okay, so now we've got questions and answers regarding common landlord and tenant problems. So I'm not going to go through all these. Some of these are very Hawaii specific, like general excise tax, like may landlords impose a general excise tax charge on the security deposit? No. Let's see. We can do this. Is there a grace period? Okay, here it is. Is there a grace period for paying rent? Not in the landlord-tenant code. Many landlords permit a certain number of days beyond the due date to pay rent without penalty, and many rental agreements include a provision. If not otherwise stated, rent is payable on the due date. And they, again, in the late fee, there was it's not more than 8% of the rent amount can be the late fee. And there's a bunch. Discrimination, you don't want to have any discrimination. And there's actually at the very last page of this workbook that I've been reading out of, let's see if I can turn this. If you're looking at this on YouTube, it's actually really cool. And it's just a one-page or spreadsheet of the deadlines, the types of tenancies. So it talks about if you have week-to-week tenancy, a month-to-month tenancy, or a lease, like a fixed lease, what the deadline dates are of everything that's involved, including return of security deposit, notice of rent increase, general repair, improper use, things like that. It's just a one-pager. That's very, very easy peasy, really nice. I'm just going to go through a couple more things, but main thing is I want to help you, if you need help in the state of Hawaii with either your rental or you're a tenant or you're thinking of getting into rentals, you need to educate yourself. Usually the Legal Aid Society is where to go, but not always. You can call the Landlord Tenant Information Center. I'm going to give you that number. It's 808-586-2634. If you're on Maui and you want some information, whether you're a tenant or a landlord, you can jump on Facebook, search for the Maui Tenants Association. I'm actually involved with them as well. Even though I'm not a tenant, I find it very informational. There's also a Honolulu Tenants Union, depends on where you are. If you are wanting help, the Legal Aid Society is legalaidhawaii.org. Legal Aid Society of Hawaii is legalaidhawaii.org. And by the way, I've had them on this podcast before. So if you are interested, I think it's episode 59, you can go on there. I've actually had one of the lawyers, he was great. And they've got it right on their homepage, the recording of the podcast, All My Life as a Landlord, which is kind of cool. So just to sum it up, each of the location-specific podcasts are set up in the exact same way, answering the 4 questions. What are the basics of the tenancy laws? What are the nuances in that location? And some guidance about abandoned items, and then what to do about getting help. This is the same format for every location-specific episode. So if you're interested in another geographic area, know that you already know what I'm going to talk about, just in a different location. And a reminder, of course, this episode is not all inclusive. You must research further in your specific area, including your city, county, regional district, mayor's office, any other governing body that involves your rental location. But today's episode will get you started. Okay, here's your call to action. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are that you're either new to real estate or you have real estate in the state of Hawaii. things you can do to help yourself. Read the Hawaii Residential Landlord-Tenant Code. The other thing you can do is to check out your local meetup in your local city, county, your island, wherever you are. Just look for a local meetup group. You can also find them on Facebook, on social media of some kind. So if you need help, you can find that on social media, but there are also in-person meetups. Just jump on social media and ask. Lots of local folks are asking questions just like you are. So if you have learned something from today's show, could you please give me a review on whatever platform you've listened to this podcast on? That would be great. Today, I am recording this episode on board the Carnival Splendor, a cruise ship floating between Australia, and I'm actually looking out the window, looking at New Zealand. Real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode live right now in the library, episode 124, about the province of Ontario.